So I'm not Thomas, as you can tell. So Thomas was due to speak tonight, but he said, could he have a holiday? And I said, no problem. So he was trying to squeeze in holidays in between other things that he and Rhoda were doing. So it worked out this evening because it's half term and I'm just back from Israel. I thought I would share with you some of the things that I encountered, show you some pictures about things that we were able to see. And also, more than that, we're going to be reading a few scriptures. One of the amazing things that I experienced was that when you're actually feet on the ground, you can visualize and see things that you spend so much time reading about, and it really helps you grasp a bigger picture. So I'm going to share some of those things with you tonight. It was an incredible privilege to be able to go. There was 8 of us. Edwin Michael led the team. Some Elim pastors, Church of Ireland, and even a Presbyterian thrown in there as well. So it was quite a unique mix, and we had lots of good conversations. But because it was a small team, we were able to do a fair bit of traveling and get around. So I can't imagine, Pastor Sandy would know about this, but a big, massive team of 20 or over 20, it's hard getting everyone together. But with us, it was just kind of, let's go. We can go to as many places as possible. So that's what I'm going to share with you. So even if you have your Bible, I would love you to turn. I'd say that too soon. I'm not going to turn to Scripture just yet, but I will be in a moment. But obviously, this is the land of Israel. And what is really remarkable about this land is that it's so small, but yet it plays such a key role in world events, and also there's so much history in this land. And there are parts of Israel, as you drive through it, you can actually see one border and the other as you travel in a car. It doesn't take you very long to get from the top to the bottom, and left to right can be done in quite a short space of time. But it's quite a small land. But you can see down the bottom left would be where Egypt is, and then you have Jordan on one side, and then at the top you have Syria and the other Arab nations around it. So it is pretty much surrounded, but it plays a very key role, and it has done throughout history. And we know that because God had a specific and has a specific purpose for this small region. This is God's land. There's a lot of fighting over this piece of land, and there has been a checkered past and checkered history. But way back at the very beginning, it was God who said, this is a land that I'm going to set apart for my purposes and plans. And he has always maintained that promise. So we arrived, we went from Dublin to Istanbul to Tel Aviv. So Tel Aviv is kind of on this coast here. Over here, you can see the airport symbol. And then we traveled up to Tiberias, and we spent the first 2 nights in Tiberias. When you're reading through the Gospels, and if tonight is too fast for you, I'm trying to give you 5 days worth in half an hour, so please bear with me. You're going to get a lot of stuff. And if you write down something, I'll leave space at the end for questions. But when you're reading the Gospels, when it says the Sea of Tiberias or the Sea of Galilee, it's calling it that because on one of the banks is Tiberias, looking over the Sea of Galilee. So it's the same place, but sometimes it's called by different names. So that's where we were. So it was a hard life, but this was the lookout from our hotel. So we were looking over this lovely view. There was a bit of works going on, but that city or that town there is Tiberias. So it's a well-built-up place. It's quite a nice place, and you're looking over this lovely lake as well, which was beautiful, a real privilege as well. So what we did then on the first couple of days, we went here. This was our first site, Caesarea Maritime, so you'll have that in the authorized, or Maritima. But this was the capital of Judea in the time of Jesus. So this was known. This was a key point and a key place to be. The stones on the left are actually 2nd century. So not long after Jesus, you're seeing pretty much what he would have experienced and things that he would have seen. And on the right, it's not a great picture, but that's an amphitheater on the right. So it's where speeches would have been given, where shows still do take place. Some of the shows, the Hillsong recordings have taken place here, and that's where it's been. We had a really funny moment where I was going to not say the nationality of the person, but you'll probably be able to guess. But we were all standing, and everyone was getting their information about the strategic location and all that it was. And this girl started singing Amazing Grace into this amphitheater. So everything's going on around her, and she's standing, really good singer, really amazing singer. And everyone all in our group was going, isn't that beautiful? You can really sense the presence of God. And she got to the end, and she says, did you get all of that? on tape. You know, we all thought this was going to be a really lovely moment, but it was an American girl who just wanted to do a bit of a performance and wanted to get famous, you know, singing in this lovely theatre. We all had a right giggle to ourselves, trying to get Alistair to do it, but he wasn't up for it. So this was a key port, as you can see. So the Roman capital of the province of Judea in the time of Jesus. The Apostle Paul was imprisoned here for 2 years and preached to the last of the Herods here, King Agrippa. So you'll read about that in Acts. And this city was the home of Philip the Evangelist and his 4 daughters. So this is this area in this region, an amazing port. And Herod had created an amazing feat of architecture. You don't see it in these pictures, but if you go home and you Google it and see an overhead shot, he had created a harbor that extended way out into the sea. And it's amazing when you think of what he was able to achieve. But this area here, this is where they had chariot races. This is where they would have had their games and their fighting and all that would have taken place. And on the right-hand side is the remains of an amphitheater as well. So there was a lot of that going on. And the girl who was guiding us around told us that the word arena is actually the origin of that means sand that's soaked in blood. And this is where it comes from, places like this, where people would have fought for sport in the presence of kings, and it would have been really blood sport that would have went on. So we were able to see that, we were able to journey around that. And Herod the Great created this amazing temple. Now a palace that jutted out into the water, and these are the foundations of Herod's own palace. But Pontius Pilate also would have stayed here during his reign as prefect. So when he was overseeing judicial matters in Jerusalem, he would have traveled up to Jerusalem, but he would have stayed here most of his time. So again, a very hard life. But this is where he would have lived, looking out in this lovely location. And in the middle there, this is like an indoor swimming pool where he would have stayed to stay out of trouble and just enjoy his life. Amazing to think that the men that we read about in Scripture, this was how they lived and how they existed and what they did. So really, really incredible place. We spent probably pretty much the first day here, and you were able to see the inscriptions of Prefect Pontius Pilate that dated back to the end of the 1st century as we walked around, which was amazing. And the second day, the end of the first day, this is Mount Carmel, where Elijah had faced down the prophets of Baal. So this is the view from Mount Carmel looking down into the valley. I kind of thought it was Elijah up here, thinking what would this have felt like all those years ago. But the landscape is pretty much the same. It's hills and it's mountains, and it's actually a mountain range. Carmel's not like a big massive peak. It's actually a long kind of mountain range, and you can see for miles around it. But do you remember at the end of that story where it says that Elijah and the people chased the prophets of Baal down the hill into the valley? And we don't usually get to that part of the story, but they killed them, all of them, because they've been leading the people of God astray. And that's where the story ends, basically. But you can see how that would have happened, because once you get down that hill, there's really nowhere to go. There's nowhere to hide. So that was the picture as you're looking down into the valley, which was some sight. This is kind of a landscape picture. It's hard, or one of those panoramic pictures. It's hard to get the scope of it, but this is like me standing with a camera and just looking right round. But you can see it's a beautiful, beautiful region. It's winter time there, but it's still very lush and very green at this part. So yeah, I was thinking about Elijah and all that went on there, and all of those things. And from this vantage point, you can't really see it here, but along the walls, it showed you arrows pointing towards different places, like Tel Aviv, Jerusalem. But down at the bottom right, it says Megiddo. And that's where we get Armageddon from. So at the very end, there will be one big battle that will take place. And it will be this valley that it takes place in. So the Battle of Armageddon, when all the armies and all the forces join in this place, and this is you looking down onto what that plane looks like. I don't know what your end time perspective is, and if you think that's symbolic or literal or whatever it is, but this is a significant place, because if you're a person that takes that very literally, this is where it will all play out. This is where it will all happen, and you can see how it would lend itself to that, because beyond these hills And as we've seen at the start, in the different borders, there are nations everywhere around here. There's people fighting over this land. Even within the land itself, there are different groupings and different power struggles. But this is where it will all happen. So it was a brilliant sight to see. And we got great weather as well. It's usually quite wet at this time of year, but it didn't rain really at all. This is one of the things that fascinated me most about the trip, and that was the history of the land itself. So this is, we went on a tour in Nazareth, and this was one of the pictures that they showed us. And this is really the different powers that have ruled in the land of Israel since the first century. So some of these names you might have heard of. So Byzantine, Crusader, Ottoman, British, and obviously the state of Israel being founded. But if you look from right to left, obviously in the first century you had the Romans who held power. But after the fall of Rome, the Byzantine period was basically a Christian period. Well, Christian in inverted commas. It was a time when the ordinary people were forced to be Christian because of Constantine, who said that everyone must convert to Christianity. That Byzantine period was that. And this is one of the things that really kind of annoyed me a bit. The Christians have made a real mess of these key sites. Big, massive, ornate, silly churches over these key sites that go back way to Old Testament times. And you go in and you're going looking for the history, and what do you have? You have this massive, big, silly-looking church with all the bells and whistles and the robes. And I was kind of going, scratching my head, going, why on earth would you do that? Do you know, that kind of way? But that's just me. But that was during this period, the Byzantine period, where that happened. But then after that came the Islamic period, when the Muslims came in and basically destroyed as much as they could. But after the Islamic period, the church, again in inverted commas, sent the crusaders across Europe into Israel to try to free the people on the ground. Along the way, they pillaged themselves. They killed people along the way. And when they got here, there was a lot of conflict and a lot of bloodshed. And they weren't without excuse either. Afterwards, the Mameluke, or some people spell it differently, but this is basically a period where sultans had a slave labor force, and the slaves were the ones who fought, and that's what that period was. And then you have the Ottoman Empire, which was quite a long-standing empire, which was basically a Turkish empire that ran right up until the time of the British in Israel, and then you have the State of Israel formed. All that to say that the fact that Israel is still standing today with any sites in it that you can even go and see is a miracle, because there's been such war and such bloodshed for century after century after century, held under different rulers at different times. And the fact that there is a people that still call themselves faithful to God, that trace their ancestry back to Abraham, is in itself a testimony to God's faithfulness. Because we know in our country, there's been fighting here, there's a lot of hatred, there's a lot of bitterness, but this country knows hatred and bitterness and bloodshed on a whole other scale. And it really was astounding to see how the things have changed over the years. So it's still going on. We went to see Nazareth then, where Jesus spent the formative years of his life in Nazareth. And this is an interesting wee insight that I didn't even know. This is an olive tree that is about 500-year-old. So the wider it gets and the more shoots it gets, you can tell the age of it. And the guy who was taking us around Nazareth, this was pretty much close to where Jesus would have been brought up. He was telling us a bit of the significance of this tree. The word Nazareth and the place Nazareth gets its origin from this word, this Hebrew word, netzer. And that word actually means stump or shoot or branch. So that's what it means. Now, some of you who know your Bible will be thinking immediately of the significance of Jesus, the son of David, or the one from David's line, who was the son of Jesse, and how Jesus was born here to fulfill Old Testament prophecy. And it's here in Isaiah 11, verse 1. A shoot will come up, or a branch will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord, and he will delight in the fear of the Lord. Now we know that's about Jesus. We know that's who it is, but there's this amazing way in which God's sovereign plan is worked out, not just in word, but actually even in location. And what you can see here from the root of this olive tree are these shoots. They were saying to us about the olive tree that it's really hard to kill. So even if you lift it up and transplant it to another location, it will grow again. Even if you cut it down, the shoots will come up from the root. They will find a way to survive. And this is a prophecy given hundreds of years before Jesus came. And that is exactly who he was. A branch from the stump of Jesse, who was the father of David. It's amazing to think about that. And in Matthew 2, verse 23, and he went and lived in a town called Nazareth. So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene. So there's significance in that as well. In Nazareth, they showed us around some of the hillside regions, and this picture on the left is actually of an old wine press. So you're kind of looking at these. The big hole on the right is a close-up of one of those big dips, but he showed us around it and showed us how the wine was made, and the tramping of the grapes and all of that sort of thing, which was amazing. But if you've got a Bible, go to Mark 12 and see why this is significant. Now think about Mark 12 and think about what you're seeing here in a picture in Nazareth, which was probably only less than 100 meters from where Jesus would have been brought up. And the guy who was showing us around was saying it's quite possible that when Jesus is telling the parable of the tenants in Mark 12, this is the image that he has in mind. It says he began to speak in Mark 12, verse 1. In parables, and he says, a man planted a vineyard. Imagine it was there. He put a wall around it, dug a pit for the winepress, and built a watchtower. Then he rented the vineyard to some farmers and went away on a journey. At harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants to collect from them some of the fruit of the vineyard, but they seized him, beat him, and sent him away empty-handed. Then he sent another servant to them. They struck this man on the head and treated him shamefully. He sent another. That one they killed. He sent many others. Some of them they beat, others they killed. He had one left to send, a son whom he loved. He sent him last of all, saying, they will respect my son. But the tenants said to one another, this is the heir. Come, let's kill him. His inheritance will be ours. So they took him and killed him and threw him out of the vineyard. What then will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and kill those tenants and give the vineyard to others. And we'll finish the reading there. But the guy was saying, as he was showing us around, it's quite possible that this was one such vineyard that was right on Jesus' doorstep. They have found watchtowers the foundations of watchtowers situated around this vineyard and other walls that date back to the 1st and 2nd century. And I was just thinking, it was all so ordinary. Jesus' stories that he told were about things that he was seeing, things that he was able to see with his own eyes, examples that they would have understood, because that's exactly how things would have played out in his day. A vineyard, watchtowers, walls, tenants, people who worked, and people who abused their responsibility. And Jesus is using all these things as examples. And I was in my element, as I thought about all these things. And in Nazareth again, and this was called the Nazareth village. This isn't Jonty, by the way, for some of you who know Jonty, thinking, what's he doing in Israel? This was a guy who was showing us around the Nazareth village. He was a brilliant guy. And he took us around and had built a replica synagogue, which would have been very like the synagogue in Nazareth, where Jesus would have talked and would have discussed, just like this, where the people sat around the outsides, pillars in the middle, and everyone asked questions, and the reader would have got up in the middle, said what he said, and then there would have been discussion that took place. I think in the church we need to get better at talking, and it's why the Jews were so wise, and they understood who they were, and they understood the Word of God, because they talked about it. They weren't just told it, but they actually reasoned amongst themselves, and I absolutely loved that. This was a viewpoint as we traveled from Nazareth then back down into Tiberias. As you're looking out here, and this might interest some of you that are interested in the conflicts in Israel, this range here, as you're looking across the Sea of Galilee, this is called the Golan Heights. Anyone familiar with that term, the Golan Heights? Some people are saying absolutely no, no way. But this mountain region in Old Testament times was called Bashan. So some of the Old Testament prophets would have referred to Og, king of Bashan, and this is where he would have had his stronghold. So it was a very strategic location, looking over Israel, looking into the land, but on this sheer cliff that was really, really hard to climb. One of the Old Testament prophets, I can't remember who it is, but he says, "Woe to you, cows of Bashan, who sit up in your ivory towers and your palaces," and all the rest of the people were suffering. I'm not sure if he was referring to women or who he was referring to, but he was referring to someone that he didn't like. But this was this region, and today it's known as the Golan Heights. So over the different conflicts throughout the different centuries, this has always been a key area to hold. Obviously, it's very hard to defeat somebody on a cliff that sheer and that severe, but something remarkable happened during the 6-day war. The 6-day war was a day when Israel had to fight for their right to survive, basically. And Sandy will be able to tell me the date, 1967, when the nations that surrounded Israel came against them, basically to annihilate them. But Syria held these Golan Heights as a stronghold. So you think about that. It's hard to imagine in our land today. You think of an army that sets itself up on one of our mountains, the mountains of Mourne, basically, where you're thinking about going up and fighting those. Well, that's what these Golan Heights are like. But during the 6-day war, the Israelite forces were able to defeat Syria, who held this stronghold. And that's why so many people believe that God's hand for this nation is still upon them, to favor them, to bless them, to save them, because this was a miraculous overthrowing of a power that seemed as if you couldn't beat it. Beyond these hills, now held by Israel, is Syria. So just beyond that hill, if you go up to the top of that hill and look over, that is all Syria. So it's right on the borders of Israel. And if you look then along, so you're looking, this was the Golan Heights that runs right along here, and you have a valley in between there that the river runs down. But this region here is the kingdom of Jordan. So when you hear about Jordan, that's where it is. It's literally right there. So Israel is always overlooked by enemies on every side. And you can understand then, and I could understand now, why Israel's security forces need to be so good. Because at any time, if these nations come together again to try to come into Israel to take the land, they're going to need to have some serious defense systems in place. And they do for that reason. And the days that we were up even on Mount Carmel, we seen the fighter jets flying over, which was amazing. Scared the life out of you, but it was amazing to see. But that's what you have. You have Golan Heights. Over behind that, you have Syria. And then on the right-hand side, you have Jordan. That's just a bit of history. And then you have this beautiful valley that runs in between. The cultivation goes on. And you're running from, if you're up here on the left-hand side, you're running from north right down to south, as you go right down through the middle of Israel. This was probably my highlight of the trip. This is the Sea of Galilee. A bit choppy, yeah. People were laughing and saying, "Did you not try to get out of the boat and have a wee go?" And actually, the tour guide told us that people had tried on days like this to get out of the boat and have a wee go at walking on the water. Not one of them succeeded. In fact, a few had to go to hospital. But they were telling us that there is a Jerusalem complex, that people tend to go a bit strange when they go into this land, and they get a bit carried away with things, and they were jumping out of it. Some people were jumping out of the boat, seeing if they could walk on the water. I did not do that. As you can tell, I didn't. I'm still here to tell the story. But this was us. I've got a video that I'll show you one time whenever I'm preaching on that, but there's I have a video of this day. And I think what was amazing about it is it was kind of, you were looking at the hills that Jesus would have looked at. A lot of the sites that you went to in Jerusalem and other sites that had Christian influence, you had big churches placed on key sites. But here out in the water, looking at the hills, and you're thinking about Jesus making this journey, I was having a bit of a moment going, "Lord, you were right here. You know, I know that you were here on this sea, and this lake, and I know you looked at those hills." And I just thought, isn't that remarkable? Isn't that amazing? And on the day that we went out, we were due to go from Tiberias But it was so rough there, the wind, whatever way it was coming, it was a bit rough. So they took us over to the other side. And when you read about in Scripture about Jesus going across to the madman of Gadara, for instance, and it uses the term the other side, it's not just geographical. The region is Jews on one side and Gentiles on the other. So when we traveled around here to the other side, we were basically in more kind of Arab territory than we were on the other side. And the tour guide was telling us, whenever you're looking at Jesus making that trip, that's not just something a trip that people made. It's not just like, oh, well, we're going this way, and sure, if we pick up someone along the way, it's actually a decision that you have to make to go across to the other side for a purpose. And I thought that was remarkable, because today you're looking at a nation divided, but back then you were looking at a probably even more hostile Jew and Gentile divide. But yet Jesus kind of cut right across that, and he went to the other side, and he stood with the people that no one wanted to stand with. And he talked about people and gave value to them. So this was an amazing experience for me as we went across the Sea of Galilee. And then we came to Capernaum. Capernaum is where Jesus spent most of his ministry time in. So the 3 years of ministry, his base was here. And the foundations that you see are actually from the time of Jesus. So the houses, the structure, the setup is actually the stuff that he would have seen. And do you remember there was one of the Old Testament prophecies about the people who are living in darkness have seen a great light? It's one of the ones we use at Christmas time. Jesus said that here. And the people who were living here were surrounded on all sides by enemies too. They would have been familiar with death. They would have been familiar with oppression. And they would have been familiar with darkness. But when Jesus steps into this town and the people see this great light of hope and this beacon that things are going to get better because somebody has come to bring us hope. And it would have been here that Jesus was saying those things. That's where you have the references. Matthew 4:13, he lived in Nazareth and lived in Capernaum then during his ministry period. Peter, Andrew, James, and John were fishermen living in this village. Matthew, the tax collector, also lived here. So walking amongst these ruins and thinking about these characters lived right here. But that was the thing again. It's all so ordinary. It's just simple. It's obscure almost. When you think of this land, Israel, and then you think of these wee towns, and you think that the King of Glory lived here, and you're just going, you know, you kind of, God, we're not worthy for you to come into our lives, but yet he says, I want to come into your life, as ordinary as it is. And that's what he did by walking in these places. This is a synagogue. Now, this is probably about 4th or 5th century, but it's built upon the ruins of the one that would have been there in Jesus' time. A remarkable place to be, just thinking of all that has gone on there in the past. So in this area, as I said, this synagogue's for much later, but it's built on the ruins of what Jesus would have walked through. But Jesus taught here. He confronted the demoniac here. He healed the servant of the centurion here. And Jesus gave his sermon on the bread of life, even the Karen read out this morning, here in this place. And I would encourage you folks, if you ever get the chance to go and you have enough money, go. Or maybe some kind person will pay for you like they did for me. You can pray about that. But it's an amazing experience to see these places. But here you have another example of just Christians being Christians. So this is a church, and underneath that church is Peter's mother-in-law's house. So right under this place, so to kind of signify that this is a special place, some architect drew up plans for this spaceship and set it right on top of this area, which is really, really sad. These are the walls that have been built up over time, but right down at the very bottom, you can't see it here because you can't actually get in far enough to see it, but if you're looking down into that, you can see markings on those walls from the 2nd century that say that this was where Peter lived when he was here. So, yeah, a lot of history here. the view from the Mount of Beatitudes. We travelled up the hill and again looking out over a beautiful view and taking a bit of a panoramic photo. It was on these hills that Jesus preached the greatest sermon that's ever been preached. It was right here in this area that Jesus spoke to the crowds as they gathered. And you can see how there could have been so many people there that followed him about as he preached and taught, because there's so many areas of grassy, lush mountainside. Beautiful pictures, but just thinking about him walking these hills. This was another really interesting place they took us to. This shore, they believe that this shore, somewhere along this shoreline, would have been where Jesus showed up after he was resurrected, where Peter was out fishing after having denied Jesus, and he comes in to bring the fish that he hoped he had caught but hadn't caught any, and Jesus is there cooking breakfast for them on a beach just like this. So it's somewhere on this side. Don't know if it's right here. Again, there's a church just to the left here. But we walked this beach, and I'd always thought it was going to be quite a sandy, lovely beach, but it's more like Murlock Bay type of beach that's going on. But it was an ideal place for fishermen to come in on the stones and bring what they'd caught and all of that. And just picture Peter like looking to Jesus on the shore who's cooking breakfast over a charcoal fire. And as I walked down the stones, I kind of thought, imagine after Peter had denied Jesus and he sets out to go fishing again, go back to what he knows. And as he walks down, kicking the stones, thinking, what have I done? I've made a mess of this. 3 years. I said I would give my life for this man. I said I would follow him to the end. And here I am, back fishing again, kicking the stones as he goes out into the water. And I kind of pictured that scene as he walked that night. But then thinking about when he's seen Jesus there, and Jesus recreates the scene with a charcoal fire. The only 2 times a charcoal fire is mentioned in the New Testament, one in Caiaphas' courtyard, and the other when Jesus is cooking them breakfast at this point. The only 2 times, and that's significant. And Peter and the boys come in, and they get their breakfast, and Jesus talks to Peter. He reinstates him. We can't read all of this, but you know the story in John 21. When Jesus says, do you love me, Peter? And Peter, yes, I do. Do you love me, Peter? Yes. Do you love me? And it goes on. And this is the point where then Jesus says, Peter, you're back in the game. Like, I forgive you. Let's get on with it. So amazing. Just on a beach just like this, on this very shore. So yeah, so it was amazing. So that was Nazareth and Capernaum, and then we traveled down to Jerusalem, which is here. So we pretty much just traveled from north, Tiberias, Nazareth, down to Jerusalem. The yellow or the sort of green region in the middle here, these are territories that are still under a bit of dispute, where there's quite a lot of fighting going on. But right up around the north there in Tiberias and Nazareth, there isn't that much of conflict. But when you get down into Jerusalem, it all kind of kicks off. There's a lot of fighting. But we just traveled from north to south. This is another interesting thing about the land, is that in the north and around Mount Carmel and Nazareth and Capernaum and Tiberias is also lush and green and beautiful. But as you travel south, you're kind of going into desert region. You're kind of going where it gets a bit more arid and a bit more dry. And this is an example of it. As we drove down, so let me see if you can see Jericho. So can you see that wee dot there? Jericho? Yeah? Some people with good eyesight. So as you get down there to Jericho, just below the West Bank, as it's on the map, that's the difference. So you're looking a minute ago of the same day, and you drive 30 minutes, and you're going past Jericho, and this is the way it is. It's the city of palms. It's just palm trees everywhere, and dry, and kind of dirty. I'm sure you know this, Pastor Sandy. Jericho it's just a bit of a dump. There's nothing really to it. It's just dirty, it's dry, there are camels, there's people trying to get you to ride camels for 40 quid for 2 minutes, and that's just what you experience. That's the way it was. Looking back on different areas as we drove through, and we kind of, on the road, the guide said to us, by the way, we've just drove past Jericho, and this is a picture I snapped as we went past, and I was kind of like, where is Jericho? But there's just not much of it there anymore. Do you remember what God had said? There wasn't going to be any rebuilding. after this invasion into the land, that Joshua took the people of God in, and the place was flattened, and it was never going to be rebuilt, and it really hasn't been rebuilt again. This was a bit of a treat, this one. You travel on down that road. The Good Samaritan story that Jesus tells about the road from Jericho to Jerusalem was a road just like this. So I'd always pictured it like the M1, kind of very straight and very long, and takes you a long time to go on. But it was more to do about the region, and it was prime location for robbers because they could hide in the hills, not be seen, and it was extremely dangerous. They took us into the hills one day as we went down this road, and this picture really doesn't do it justice, because this drop here just in front of us is so sheer and so steep, and you have a load of monks that are living in here, and these are people down here on donkeys, and this is a river that runs through it. So this is the road that Jesus had in mind when he talked about the Good Samaritan journey from Jericho to Jerusalem, and how it was so dangerous, and how it was so bad, and how you were risking your life making that journey. And I just thought, my goodness, this is a terrifying road to be on, even for us as we went through it. But it was great to see. You can see the way they've dug into the rocks here. You can picture some people spending their lives in these buildings, just seeking God. That's really what it's supposed to be, but who knows what they're doing. But yeah, so that was the journey down, and then this is us getting into Jerusalem. And I haven't got much left, folks, so hope you're still with me. As you looked over Jerusalem, there's some key areas. This graveside here, these are all tombs. And this is the Mount of Olives. This is what this is. And a lot of the Jews believe that being buried here, they'll be first to meet the Messiah when he returns. When Jesus said, when he was going up, and the angel said that this same Jesus that is gone from your sight will come back to here. Well, in the minds of Jews, when they're thinking about the Messiah, they believe that this was where he will return to. So that's why there's tombs all over this side of the mountain. And a remarkable amount of them, extremely expensive, but they're spread right across here. And this is the Mount of Olives. This arrow here is just pointing to this whole region. So what else can we see here? The wall of the temple, so again, it's not a great picture. It's hard to get everything in, but just here where this laser is, see this corner? This is the corner, the original corner of the temple that was in Jerusalem in the time of Jesus and even before. The foundations go right down. Now, it's all a bit of a mess, a bit higgledy-piggledy. There's been things built upon other things. You have the big dome that is the Dome of the Rock. It's a Muslim holy site, and that's supposed to have been where Mount Moriah and where the temple was situated, and where the Muslims believe something significant happened for them. So there's a lot of fighting about this one location, and the Dome of the Rock. I'm sure you've all have heard about that. But actually, the original temple was probably more situated over here, where there's no fighting. And these borders of the city of David, there's walls of old city, new city. There's ruins that even predate that. There's ruins of Hezekiah's tunnel. You can go through Hezekiah's tunnel. We didn't have the chance to do that. I wish we had of. But this city is filled with history, and there's some amazing sights to be seen in this place. And when you look at it, like all the size of it, but all that happened here, you're way back to David's time, Solomon, the temple, the sacrifices, Jesus, what he did, how he walked, given talks here, ascending here, all the things that go on. Over on the left here, this valley that runs down here, this is Gehenna. When Jesus is referring to Gehenna, he's talking about this valley that would have been the valley that in Old Testament times the Canaanites would have sacrificed their children to Molech in this valley. So that's what he's referring to. And it was remarkable to see and to stand beside that and think about this is what Jesus was saying. This is what he was thinking about as he was given those warnings. And this circle, you probably can't read the writing, but this was probably the region of the original city of David that David lived in, just slightly down from what we're looking at there. down, as you travel down, we walked down the Mount of Olives to the right-hand side here, and it's just off the screen. But when we got to the bottom of that hill, they believe that the Garden of Gethsemane was down on that side. There's two sites that they think are accurately describing and situated in such a way that they could be where the Garden of Gethsemane was. You remember earlier I told you about the 400-year-old tree in Nazareth? Well, take a look at that one. That one goes back much further. Much, much further. So it's likely that one of these regions, and if it's not this one, the other one is within a short distance away. But this is a beautiful garden. It's well maintained. It kind of has a bit of a fence around it. But again, church right beside it. Here's the lovely church that they've put. And I thought this sign up here was great. No explanation inside the church. How true is that to a lot of churches? Don't ask any questions. But you couldn't talk, and they were shouting at you if you asked any questions whatsoever. But again, it's because they believed that the Garden of Gethsemane was here. And I know I'm having a bit of a joke and a bit of a pop at what the Christians did, but these Christian churches in the Byzantine period, which was about 300s, that date back to the 300s, it's more than likely that they knew that there were key sites there. It's more than likely that they have built a church or something to commemorate something that happened around that area. And they believed that this was where the Garden of Gethsemane was. And just down the road a bit, in fact, just a few hundred meters from where we were last, you have here the Pool of Bethesda. So remember the place where the people sat and waited on the troubling of the waters. There was a bit of superstition going on. Well, this is the pool. This is the area. There's different levels and different layers for people with probably different infirmities, where there's some deep, there's some shallow, there's ways you can make your way down. I'd always thought of it kind of like a big circle, kind of like everyone sat around the sides, but actually this is what it was. These stones and the foundation of these date back to the time of Jesus. And something that she shared with us was brilliant. The guide, the Pool of Siloam was a different place. It was, remember, where the blind man, where Jesus spat, mixed it in his eyes and told him to go wash in the Pool of Siloam. It was a different place, but with only in walking distance of this place. So Jesus did two significant miracles in Jerusalem. He did more than that, but these two ones in particular, the blind and the lame. Whenever, back in at the time of 2 Samuel, there are the references you can see in the bottom, and you can read it, 2 Samuel 5 and 6. The people who held Jerusalem way back then was a people group called the Jebusites. And the Jebusites used a phrase, and they said to King David when he was trying to take the city, that even the blind and the lame could keep you out of this city. So that was what they said. They were mocking David. They said that even the blind and the lame could keep you out, because look at your army. That was basically what they were saying. But then when Jesus comes to the city of David, he actually heals the blind and the lame in this very same place. So again, an indicator that Jesus wasn't coming to tear down walls and kill and destroy like so many before and so many after. He was coming to heal and coming to bring healing for the people who had waited a long, long time. It's a lovely point. Church of the Holy Sepulchre, this big, massive, ornate church. You couldn't even take photographs for all the stuff that was going on in here. But this stone here on the ground, this is supposed to have been the stone that Jesus was laid on. And these are all people who have made pilgrimages, laying prayer requests and whatever on this stone. But the stone itself is actually dated to around 700 years after Jesus. I don't know what people are thinking. But you get a lot of people in there, a lot of superstition, a lot of nonsense that goes on. But the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is meant to be where Jesus was, the area is meant to be where Jesus was crucified, buried, and rose again. And that's what the church and the grounds of the church are meant to be for. But I found this all rather disturbing, actually, because in this church, you have different sects of Christianity, Judaism, Islam, that all kind of function and fight with each other, even though you've got these precious memories, even that are meant to be commemorated. So you've got people walking about here who really hate each other in this courtyard. Yeah, a lot of money, time went into this. So moving swiftly on as we're coming to a close. I said that about half an hour ago, sorry. Trying to squeeze it all in. This was the view from Caiaphas's, just beside Caiaphas's courtyard, where Peter denied Jesus. This is one of the views that he had. And you're looking over here, this is all, sorry, it just went out of my head. Not Jews, not Samaritans, not Arabs, Palestinians. These are all Palestinians that live just on the other side of where the Jews are and where Jewish people live. And I would encourage you, be sure that the sources you get your information from about what's actually going on in this land are reliable. Because one thing I have come to realize is that our news reporting in our country, there's a lot of fake news, but there's a lot of anti-Israel propaganda that goes on. A lot of it. And this was one example. The Palestinians living on these hills have as much right to vote and engage in political activity as the Jews do. There's really not a lot of animosity here, even though they're living right beside one another. So when you're hearing that, there's a persecuted people group within this land, they don't have anything, they're not being looked after, they're being constantly persecuted, don't believe all of that. On the other side, we can't believe everything that we hear about Israel either. But be sure that the information you're listening to is reliable. Our guide, who was a Dutch Jew who had lived in Jerusalem from the 60s, she was able to fill us in on some of the tensions that go on within this land. And that was something that really stood out to me. I was like, that's not the story I'm hearing. Where is all the persecution? Where's all the fighting? Where's all the persecuted small people groups within this land? And she was able to say, well, Bill, Israel aren't blameless, and there's things that have happened here that haven't been good, but to a large degree, Israel are being painted in a way that's not accurate to who they are. So we're looking on down at this region, and again, this is the other side. This is the valley of Hinnom, the Gehenna that we talked about, this valley, where they would have sacrificed to Molech in this valley that runs right down the middle of it. And these are the steps that Jesus would have walked on the night that he was brought before Caiaphas. These are actually the steps that he took on that journey. I couldn't help but get a wee bit emotional as I thought about that. Walking into Caiaphas' chambers as an innocent man about to lose his life. And it was in this courtyard, just beyond these steps. You can't really get in there, it's all fenced off. But in this courtyard, which would have been Caiaphas' courtyard, is where Peter said, I don't know him, 3 times on that very night. And then this is the Wailing Wall. Anyone ever been to Israel, been here? A bit of an odd experience, isn't it? See a lot of bobbing heads. Guys on one side and the girls on the other. Guys with all their ringlets, and I'll show you a picture of them here. They didn't like me taking that photograph, but I took it anyway. A lot of young guys, really, really young. And when they were walking past our group, they were putting their kind of hands on their face like that and being quite rude. And the girl was telling us that their devotion to this way of life is such that they won't really engage with people outside of their own family and with outside of Orthodox Judaism. With girls especially. So within the Wailing Wall area, so if you kind of step to where I am now, there was a small group of girls who were Jews who were singing, and all of the boys with all their fingers in their ears because they didn't want to be tainted or drawn away by these sirens. And they weren't great singers, they were terrible singers, but they were all fingers in their ears and didn't want to be corrupted. And it's so interesting to see the stuff that Jesus talked about the Pharisees, about rules upon rules, about laying on people a burden that's too hard to bear, about straining the gnat but allowing a camel through, about the beam in your own eye. You're trying to get the speck in the other person's eye. You can actually see that all at work, even in these young guys, even today. All this time later, their strictness, their devotion, their law-keeping, all of that, the weight of this, they're still carrying, still running to the Wailing Wall, which the bottom 3 rows are the original walls of the temple that date way back to Jesus' time and before. And that's all pretty much what they have left. So they go, there was one of their special teacher rabbis was there this day, so they all make the trip so they can rub shoulders with them, and they can all say, look at what we're doing. And they stand and they bob like this, constant, for ages and ages and ages. And if you want to go down to the wall, you have to put on a wee hat. I refused to because I was just stubborn that way, so I just stayed at a distance and watched. And I was a bit sad. I kind of thought, this is dead. It's empty. It's going through the motions, and they've missed the Messiah. So pray for them. The garden tomb. I'll finish here because I actually I've got a bit more to do, but I'll not do it tonight. I'll show you other times in sermons. So the other position, the other place where there is a tomb and a site that is believed to be more likely where Jesus actually was buried and where he rose from the dead is this site. And I thought this was quite funny. Closed on Sunday. I want you to told Jesus that. But the garden tomb here at this site was a beautiful garden. This is owned kind of like this is really all Arab and Muslim up here. But this site that we're on and we're looking out from is owned by evangelical Christians. And they maintain this garden. And it's much more, Sandy would probably say this too, it's a much nicer feel to it than the other one with all the bells and whistles. This is quite a respectful garden, and I thought, I could probably see this as being a more likely site. But anyway, it was discovered in the 1800s, and the foundations and the rock formations and everything kind of tied in better with the biblical story. It's known as Gordon's tomb because there was a general in the 1800s called General Gordon, a British officer, who gave a lot of credence to this being the actual site. He wasn't the one who found it, but he was the one who kind of wrote a lot about it and said this is more likely to be the site. You can't see it now, but this was, when you look at the old pictures, and Audrey, I know you went a few years ago, but this used to have a much more pronounced skull feature on it. So you used to be able to see the eyes better and the face better, and they believed that this was the place of the skull, Golgotha, on this hillside. Outside of the old city that we were looking at a few moments ago, I believe that this was where Golgotha was. And just when you go back into the garden, which is coming towards me, you have on the other end of it this tomb that ties in quite well with the biblical account. Cut from a stone, a rich man's tomb, in a garden, near a garden, all of that. And inside of it, you have this Christian inscription that basically tells the story of who Jesus was, that dates right back to the 3rd century. Now, they didn't have markers back then, but they've markered over the top of it so that it's preserved. But there's a carving in the wall in this place like that. I couldn't tell you, can't remember what all the symbols mean, but it's significance for what happened here, what's believed to have happened here, that goes way, way back. And again, for someone to go to those lengths and write something in the wall in this place and somewhere that lines up with a biblical account, it's probably a big deal. So you can't actually get in, but you have on this side a slab, and on the other side, you can't really see it there in the dark, but this is believed to have been where Jesus was led and where he rose again from. And yeah, they're keen, the group that own it, they were very keen to not be too definite about it and not be very dogmatic about it, because it's a long time after the event, obviously. But tying everything together, I thought it was quite a good site. And we had a lovely time of communion here. And I'll finish here. As you travel down onto the south, and you go through these desert regions, you have the Dead Sea region, which is on your left-hand side as you go down. And on the right, you have mountains and hills. And En-Gedi. En-Gedi is a key place. Anyone remember what happened in En-Gedi in the Old Testament? Nobody? Brilliant. So David fled from the city of David that we were just in to the mountains and the hill regions in En-Gedi, hid in the caves, and Saul followed him. And we actually went up the hills to the place where it's believed that David cut the robe from Saul when he was in the cave. Do you remember David's followers said, here's your chance. God has delivered him into your hands. Now is your time. And David, out of respect, he just cut his robe off and then told him afterwards, I could have killed you, but I didn't. Why are you chasing me? And she was telling us about the significance of the robe and how the robe represented authority and power and status, and why whenever Saul grabbed the robe of Samuel and tore it, why Samuel said, the kingdom will be torn from you, just like you've torn this robe off me. There was a significance in what David was doing, so he was a bit more cheeky than sometimes we give him credit for. But that happened in these hills, and we went up the mountain. We were able to see the sights were amazing, and I really enjoyed this region. If I had had more time, I would have loved to have stayed a bit more here because it's so unspoiled. And you could just imagine these chases taking place, and then we were able to travel down to the Dead Sea as well. Yeah, I thought I could get that done in a lot less time, but there you are. So yeah, a lot to see, a lot to experience, and probably over the next few months, I'm sure, as we work through Samuel, you'll probably hear and see some of the pictures that connect the stories. It's certainly for me, as someone who preaches and teaches, that was really one of the benefits for me, because you kind of understand, well, that's where Jesus was, and that's what he was looking at, and that's how he traveled, and just all of that and the time it would have taken. And that has really helped me even in understanding the bigger biblical story, even in terms of the Old Testament. And even as you go further down south into Dead Sea region, you've seen the Qumran caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. Anyone ever heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls? Dead Sea Scrolls, I always thought, were a bit of I don't really want to put too much stock in those. But actually, when we traveled around that it was like a site where you could see where the original Dead Sea Scrolls were found in 1946-47. There were old clay pots, and within them there were found all of the books of the Old Testament, either completed or fragments of them, apart from the book of Esther. And they dated back to the 1st century, basically the time of Jesus. So when they took the scrolls out, and some of them ripped them up and were trying to get money for them, which was a real shame, and they ended up sticking them back together because they wanted to preserve them. But there's been a lot of work done. But they were able to date those scrolls and the writings of those scrolls back to the 1st century. Now, why that matters for us is that for a long time, our biblical record that we have was criticized because the events were supposed to have taken place much later than the account. So if you have a King James Bible, it will say that this was taken from the Masoretic text in the start of it. And that will mean that the translators who have given you your Old Testament in the King James Version, they were looking at text and manuscripts that were dated from about the 9th century after Jesus. So it was quite a long gap after Jesus, and that's where they were getting their stuff from. So people used to say, well, the events have taken place much later. Do you know, this isn't right. But when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls that dated back even further, they were able to match up and say, actually, things haven't changed at all. There's such an accuracy between these detailed accounts from the 9th century and the 1st century. And that's why the Dead Sea Scrolls were so important. That's where a lot of our translations today, they go to those source materials that are further back. And that means that the accounts that we have, we can be sure of. That's a bit technical. But just to say, that was a good find because it added credibility to the biblical account and said that actually things have not changed the way a lot of critics would say. So yeah, that'll do us for tonight. Any questions? Probably have loads of questions. Come and chat to me afterwards if you want anything specific, want to know anything specific, anything like that. But as I said, probably over the next few months, we'll be able to show maybe a picture within a sermon that'll help us identify what we're talking about. So there you are. Thank you. Thank you for your prayers as well. Where it was safe, it was good, it was all flowed really, really well. We had a really good time. Let's just pray, and then that's us done. God, we thank you so much for who you are and your goodness and your blessing in our lives. And Lord, we do thank you that the faith that we have, we can be assured of. It's not a hope-so faith. It's grounded in reality, in locations, in places where you walked. Lord, and we can know this. It's not a fairy tale. It's not made up. It's not the invention of man, but it's actually rooted in reality. Lord, we thank you that you came and that you walked on this earth, Lord, to show that you loved people that much, to show that you really did care, not just saying it, but actually living it out, and the places where you walked. and you made yourself known, and you revealed to us the Father's heart for all of humanity. And God, I pray that as we seek to communicate your love to those around us, I pray that you would give us that heart and that willingness to go and stand where they are and walk alongside them in the midst of their pain and in their difficulty. And in so doing, Lord, we will bring you, the light of the world, even into the darkness. So, Lord, help us do that this week as we seek to glorify you by our lives. In Jesus' name, amen.